forget half of what you meant to say. And so just take a minute and talk. Sorry about my face on video, but it seemed odd to be having it pointing at nothing. So a couple things I want to talk about. One's horsepower. When you think about horsepower, there's two ways. I would encourage you to think about it two ways. There's horsepower that you generate in the motor, and then there's horsepower that you waste in operation of the motor. Motors, tight tolerances, lots of friction. We waste a lot of horsepower. We waste horsepower doing things that are unimportant. We waste horsepower doing a lot of things that are important. But if you just went and measured pure horsepower that a motor generates based on the explosions in the cylinders, probably a pretty significant number, much more than we would ever estimate by using a dyno. But we burn a lot of that horsepower in friction, we burn a lot of that horsepower in heat, a lot of horsepower gets wasted. And so when I'm thinking about this motor and I'm looking at building it, I've been given a lot of consideration, not to just generation of horsepower, but conservation of horsepower. And there's a few things that you can do that are relatively easy and certainly beneficial in the long run. Obviously, the fact that this motor, this 302, is a roller lifter motor, that's a considerable savings in horsepower. If the same motor were a flat tappet motor, you're going to lose horsepower by friction on the camshaft, on the lifter. By using roller rockers, you have less friction, roller lifters. It's the same reason that I'm moving from a standard rocker to a roller rocker. Again, rockers lose horsepower and friction while lifting the valve. Maybe, definitely less so than a lifter, but again, the roller on the rocker has less friction, has less contacting surface to the valve stem, and so it has less friction. The fact that we're running higher, heavier springs, it's required by the camshaft, but again, that's energy lost trying to compress a stronger spring. Another thing that we're adding to this motor is a Canton Racing Products windage tray. It's funny, when I made my first video on the 4.7 Jeep motor, I called it a big diaper. I didn't even know what it was. But that just led me to go find out what it was, study up on it a little bit. And what happens inside your oil pan, if you're not aware, the spinning and whirling action of the camshaft, it basically tends to atomize your oil, and you end up with this oily environment that this crankshaft is spinning in, and impacting with all those micro droplets of oil burns horsepower. I actually called Canton Racing when I was wanting to choose my windage tray. I decided to run a windage tray on this motor, and I called them and was talking to a guy who was apparently quite the expert in windage trays, and he said the expectation for this motor with a windage tray is a 10 to 15 horsepower conservation. So it basically translates to an increase in horsepower, measured horsepower. The motor's been generating that amount of horsepower, but it was losing it to windage down in the oil pan. I mean, the added benefit is your oil pan runs a constant higher level because you don't have all this frothing and micro particles of oil being suspended in the oil pan due to the whipping action of the crankshaft. It's not whipping like you think of, whipping a cake batter, because the crankshaft runs typically above that level of the oil unless your oil is too full. But it's more as the droplets fall down through the return galleys into the oil pan and they contact the rotating crankshaft. The crankshaft just whips them up into the air and atomizes them, and it just makes for more viscous air in the oil pan because of this atomized oil, and it costs you horsepower. It slows down your crank. It builds resistance against your crank. So you're looking at 10 to 15 horsepower basically for free, or for the cost of a windage plate, windage tray, which was like $50. That's really cheap horsepower. I mean, if you get 10 horsepower for $50, it's $5 a horsepower. If you want a 300 horsepower motor, it's $1,500. That's a cheap motor when it comes to horsepower generation. So think about, when you think about wanting to build a motor, you want to think about building a motor that conserves um, horsepower that you've already generated. You're paying the fuel bill to generate the horsepower. Spend a little time focusing on conserving the horsepower. What can we do to conserve horsepower in our motor? Um, I'm not going to run a fan on this motor. I'm going to run or not a motor mounted fan. I'm going to run a fan, electric fan, on the radiator. So that's going to conserve horsepower. Stirring all that air, moving all that air takes horsepower. Not a huge savings, but savings all the same. It makes me give consideration to running an electric water pump. That's not uncommon anymore. As you can run an electric water pump and not run a water pump on your timing cover, the traditional situation where it runs off a belt off the crank. I think I'm going to stay with a standard water pump concept because it just looks like a motor to me. Motor would look incomplete without a water pump in a traditional sense, but again, you're burning horsepower pumping water. Maybe you rather burn that using electricity off the alternator. Generally, the alternator's always spinning. It's not always generating electricity. To the point that you don't have to necessarily run a higher amperage alternator or something, it may be worthwhile to run an electric water pump. So, if you want to talk about building a motor with horsepower and you're focusing on horsepower, spend a little time thinking about not just how to generate horsepower, which I've been very focused on, thinking about my heads and my cylinders, my piston choice, my cylinder overbores, my EFI to generate more horsepower. Those are great things to give consideration to, but you can also get a lot of horsepower just by not wasting it, by conserving horsepower, by making good choices with roller lifters, roller rockers, windage trays where they're available for certain motors. Now that's free horsepower. That's horsepower you're generating and you're wasting. You're burning the fuel to make it. Why waste it? So give it some thought. That was kind of a new thought for me, at least, and so I just wanted to share it with you. There are a couple of the other things I want to cover, and that's material selection. I'm getting most of my parts from Summit Racing. Let me tell you, there's nothing in the world like opening a Summit Racing box. I mean, it's Christmas all over again. It's not just Christmas, it's Christmas when you were 8 years old. It's just awesome to see all these shiny parts and to see these, cool parts that you've spent a lot of time specifying and deciding to buy, and you get to open that box and take them out one at a time and look at and appreciate each one of them. Makes you feel like you're 8 again on Christmas morning. It's really a neat thing. But again, I'm using Summit. Summit is awesome. I love Summit's online system, but I'll tell you, I love to call them and make my orders. I don't make my orders online unless it's something relatively minor. One of the things I found is that the Summit Racing texts that take your order are really great. I'm sure they have some computer prompts or something, but they're really great about asking you, well, if you're ordering this, do you need this? And as often as not, they say, you're ordering one of these, do you need one of these? And I go, oh yeah, I forgot about the gasket, or I forgot about the bolt set, or I forgot about needing that part because I'm buying this part. So it's really, they're really a good resource in my opinion. I'm not going to sit and talk about quality and price and everything else. I'm just going to say that I really enjoyed them. And they've been very useful to me in the sense that they trigger me to think about things that I might have forgotten otherwise. And then the last thing I want to cover, just in this brief conversation before I move on to putting the motor together, is call your vendors. Call your vendors. I have had the greatest success with calling vendors. When it was time to order my cam, I'm ordering a comp cam for this particular motor. I called Comp and I talked to their technical guys and I asked them what are the best springs to use with this cam, what are the best lifter system to use with this particular cam, what are the, are these specs going to get me close to where I want to be? They know. If they know, they'll share it with you. I mean, they're all about making the sale. Even if that sale is through Summit, that's fine with them. I mean, many people, many of the companies nowadays don't retail. They only go through reps like Summit or Jegs or. And listen, I don't mean to sell Summit. There are many great providers out there besides Summit. That happens to be one that I've been using recently. I've used Jegs in the past for a few things, but you know, they know you're buying it through Summit. It's not a problem if you call them and you're buying it through somebody besides them. They're making just as much money either way. They're glad to have your business no matter who it's through. So make the phone call. Just as an example, I called, I don't call a lot of people, but just the other day I called Can Racing Products. Can Racing Products makes the, amongst other things, makes the windage tray that I'm using on the bottom of the crankshaft on this motor. And I called the guy and I said, you know, here's the one I was looking at using, and this is the stud mount set I was looking at buying. What do you think about how much horsepower it'll conserve? What do you think about, you know, and he quoted dyno specs. You know, they run a 302 with this on and a 302 with this off, and they compare the raw horsepower, and it's 10 to 15 horsepower difference. That's awesome. I want to know that. Again, that's, like I said, $5 a horsepower. That's cheap horsepower. And so call him. Matter of fact, he guided me. I was looking at a windage tray that was screened, and he said, "Hey, listen, we have one that's louvered, and we find that it's slightly better on horsepower conservation, the same price." And that made my decision very easy right there. So call the people, all of them. I called. My pistons were from Keith Black. Had some questions about the piston application, make sure I was getting the right pistons, make sure I had valve clearance at certain lifts, and bam, they answered my questions. You know, and you know, even if it's just a little more than getting confirmation of what you think you already know, it's free. It's part of the package. A lot easier to make that phone call now and come up with the right answer on day one than it is to, you know, have to make that phone call after the fact about trying to return pistons because you purchased the wrong pistons. I actually got a little bit of one little bit of warning about Summit, Jegs, people like that. They are great companies. They have great people, but they are represented for many manufacturers. So when you ask them questions, they will give you answers. And I'm not saying that their answers are ever intentionally wrong, but occasionally their answers are wrong, only because you ask them a particular technical detail about a Canton windage tray or comp cams. Their answer is as good as they know. It's not nearly as good as the manufacturer. So, you know, technically specific questions. When I ordered my MSD system, which included the EFI, the coil, the distributor, the ignition controller, you know, when I ordered that whole package, I didn't call Summit and say, Summit, here's my motor, which of these should I get? Could they have answered the question? Absolutely. Who could answer the question better? MSD. Call MSD, El Paso, Texas, 1-800 number. Bam, you get the guy on the phone right off the bat pretty much, and he's got the right answer, the answer that you can take to the bank. And, you know, when you have a problem with that system, if you have a problem with that system, if you choose the right materials, yeah, you're going to return it to Summit, true enough. But it's ultimately going to be a return to MSD. I mean, it reflects on MSD. MSD will give you the best answer on MSD products. So use Summit, use Jags, use whoever your contact is, but remember that they are a multi-manufacturer representative, and they don't have the level of detail as good as they are, and they are good. They're not as good as the manufacturer themselves. The manufacturer is the one that did the R&D. The manufacturer is the one that, you know, has workshops within house regularly to update their technical representatives on various applications and, you know, positives and negatives, challenges and qualities about their product. So make the phone calls. I have found it to be extremely useful thus far. I've gotten basically, we'll say most of the parts I require for this motor rebuild. A few things still in the mail I'm waiting on, but you know, I've gotten most of those things. I'm reasonably comfortable that I've ordered the right equipment. Not because I'm all that sharp, I'm not, and not because the Summit guy said it looked good to him, though they do. Um, but because I called the manufacturer, when I call them and say I need to order them an MSD so and so, an MSD this, and MSD that, they know uh, that I've done my research. I've done my work. Am I going to have to return those? Likely not. Now, truth is, my MSD distributor got to work out a return on it already. The reason is I specified that equipment in a conversation with MSD, and I'd yet to make my camshaft selection. And my camshaft, once I called and made my camshaft selection with comp cams, I said, by the way, what distributor gear do I need to be running? And they said, you need to run a melanized gear on the distributor. And sure enough, I went and looked, and the distributor I ordered had a steel gear. So I'm going to have to return that particular item, and I'm going to have to get one with a melanized gear, or I'm going to have to send it to MSD and let them install a melanized gear. But again, these things you're going to learn after the fact. That's just the way it is in some cases. But in general, you're going to get the guidance you need. Call the people. That's why they're there. Sometimes I think, us gearheads think we know too much. And then regretfully, we end up returning too much product. And look, I'll be honest, I'm not worried about returning it. Returning's easy. Get a box, get a stamp. More often than not, they'll pay for the return shipping, depending on who you're dealing with. And just that's easy to do. The frustration is, one, my ego, and two, now it's slowed my project. Now I got to wait for this part to get returned, get credited, get a new part sent back to me. And the whole time I'm sitting here looking at the motor, and the next step is waiting on a part that I misordered to start with. So spend your time, do your research, make the phone calls. Great resources, Summit, JEGS, whoever you're ordering your equipment through is a great resource, no doubt. The specific manufacturer that they're representing, make the phone call to them. All of them are on the web. All of them have a contact us page. All of them just about that I've seen have got a phone number on that contact us page. And I've received nothing but great assistance. So anyway, I just want to cover those things. Right now, status is I'm going to take the heads in tomorrow. I got my valve springs and spring caps and locks and everything in today. I want to take those to my cylinder head shop, D's cylinder head shop. I'll keep saying their name over and over because I really appreciate their work. D is in dog, D's, DS. And I'll take it to them tomorrow and get them to confirm my valve choice. I haven't yet ordered the new valves. I want to go ahead and talk to my guy there and make sure I'm ordering the correct valves. And in the meantime, they can start boiling them out and doing any machine work that they need to, short of grinding the valves into the seats. And then I'm waiting on my Keith's black pistons and pistons and wrist pins. They've been shipped now. I'm waiting on them to get here in a couple of days. Take those to my machinist for my block and let him get that going. I'm hopeful that maybe sometime next week, we'll get the block and the heads back here. I'm also going to go ahead, just for conversation, I'm also going to go ahead and get them to install the pistons and wrist pins on my rods. It's real doable. I don't have a press to take them off, but I could take them over to his house, take them off over to his shop. And then also, to put them on, you've got to heat up the knuckle on the rod to just the right temperature, slide them together. I'm thinking, hey, you know what? I think I'll just pay the machinist that's doing my block to go ahead and put those together. I think it's on the order of $10 a piston. That includes pressing them off. It also includes putting them on. They have a rod heater that takes you to the right temperature, and they have the technique down much better than I do. So I think I'm gonna let them go ahead and put the pistons on the rods for me. If they were floating, there's no doubt I'd do it myself. I did it on the 4.7. And ultimately, I've actually got a set of 6 pistons that are press on that came out of an old Jeep motor that I was trying to recover and turned out to have a cracked head on it. But I think I'm going to take those and maybe just play with those and practice and get the technique down so that, I'm more comfortable next time doing it. But I don't want to slow this process. I got some vacation coming up with the holidays, and so I want to go ahead and move forward on this block and hopefully get it long blocked by the end of the holiday period. And so I need to get those things done and get it behind me. I don't want to risk, messing anything up and then having to, reorder some parts and deal with that right now. Just slow me down too much. So anyway, it was good to talk to you. If you have any comments, questions, listen, if you have questions, I'll probably just defer because I'm not all that sharp. I just kind of take this a step at a time and stop and study and learn and search. And that's another one too. Don't ever believe anything you read on the internet unless you read it from 3 or 4 independent sources. I've read a number of things that kind of, well, they didn't turn out to be true in the end of the day, or maybe they turned out to be true, but in a different way. So one thing I want to tell you about these GT40P heads. I've just learned this, and I think if you're going to be toying with GT40Ps, it's important to know. Look, here's the valves that came out of my GT40P. And, I don't have a mic long enough to mic the entire length, but if you use a standard measuring device, a stick or a tape, they look like they're pretty much the same, about 5.07, 5.08 inches, somewhere on that order. And if you stack them, if you set them on a table and look at them on a level, with a level eye, they look to be about the same length, and I'm pretty confident they are. But one thing that's different about them, and it doesn't catch the eye initially, but let me see if I can show you this without it. If you look at the length between the end of the rod and the beginning of this lock insert area where the lock sits, you'll find that the exhaust valve, the intake valve, has a shorter rod to groove length than the exhaust valve, intake and exhaust. And this is unique, relatively unique at least, to the 40P heads. The 40Ps actually have where the spring will sit here, and then the lock cap, the cap that goes on, has a different shape to the cap. And so that this shorter and then the longer basically seat the spring at about the same level. Therefore, you have similar spring strengths on each valve. If you go aftermarket and go with aftermarket springs, aftermarket locks, aftermarket spring caps, you're going to find that this is going to give you slightly different geometry between your intake and your exhaust. So if you use stock valves, please be aware there are kits available that are specifically designed for transformation of a GT40P head to an aftermarket spring system. In my case, I'm actually going to replace my valves, and because I'm replacing my valves and my springs and my locks and my caps, I just need to be sure I order the right valves that have the same end to groove dimension. That should be something that's specified for your rods. The rods should specify the diameter of the valve, the length of the valve and stem, the diameter of the stem, and it should specify a tip to groove dimension. That tip to groove dimension is important, and on the GT40Ps, they're different between exhaust and intake. Exhaust is on the order of 460 some thousandths, and on the intake it's about 400 thousandths. So what I'm ordering for this application with the aftermarket springs, aftermarket caps and locks is I'm ordering the 400 thousandths, the 0.4 inch tip to groove dimension for both the intake as well as the exhaust. One of the differences in the GT40Ps, it's a bit obscure. I've only found 1 or 2 references that speak to it specifically. I only found one that then drove me to search specifically for that. I did find one or two others. But when you talk to people about GT40Ps, they don't necessarily distinguish that the valves aren't symmetrical, that this length is different depending on whether you're on the intake or on the exhaust. So unique about the GT40P is a little different, but still not a problem. Just to need to know about it. And I'm going back with Manley valves, and not just because they're called Manley. Going back with Manley brand valves, called Manley, just like I said, call your vendors, called Manley. Explained to them what I was doing, the application, gave him the dimensions, and bam, he gave me 2 part numbers, went straight to Summit. Part numbers searched straight way to the right valve, and I've got him in my my cart right now, ready to order them. But I want to wait and confirm with my machinist at the head shop and make sure that I'm not yet misguided. So anyway, it's good to talk to you. Long video, cut it off here. Next video, hopefully we're starting to put together the bottom end on the motor. It's good to talk to you. Next time. Thanks.